exactly.
Say some not so nice things in a sweet way.
And that's my humble definition of hikmah when the Quran invite you into the way of the with hikmah. I say hikmah is to say the right person. The right person.
Marketing departments are expert at it. Sometimes, they've got our departments and organizations. Sometimes they have to fire a couple people, but they say it in such a nice way.
That's right, yeah.
You think it was a good day.
That's right. Okay. I'll just go and have a drink of water.
That's one thing. Is sometimes we're dehydrated, but we don't know it. Yeah. My wife isn't a bath, actually. But is there lights for the sisters?
Close today. كيف حالك؟ نحن إن شاء الله ربنا سبحانه وتعالى يتقبل. نعم كده الكرسي إذا تحب أظبطها أكثر يعني إن شاء الله. طيب المفروض اتصل بدري بس الهيك يا كنت ده جنبي كده. اصل عندنا كمان زائرة مهتدية كانت اسلمت في هاليفاكس من 30 سنة يمكن، فكان جاية لأنها تعرف زوجتي كويس يعني. فكانت في زيارة هنا. هي حضرت صلاة الجمعة. يا ما أنا سمعت لحد ما شاء الله. هذه اللي بعثت الفيديو بتاعها. ربنا يهدي إن شاء الله من خلقه. بس أنا مرتاح دلوقتي إن عندنا ترجمة كويسة. ربنا يجزيه خير يعني.
على النسخة دي على فكرة اللي فيها الاثنين لقيتها موجودة هنا في كندا تتباع ب $20.
يا لا إن شاء الله نقدر.
هي الاثنين.
يا في عرض انجليزي.
ونفس دي اللي هي جلد مش
أي. لا إن شاء الله ممكن نجيبها أرخص شوية بالك. The biggest problem is the cost of shipping.
كانت النسخة كان كام؟
التانية اللي هي بس انجليزي it's $2 US بس transportation brought it to 7 يعني so 7 even Canadian is very good for it. But إن شاء الله نحاول نجيب من التانية أفتكر أرخص شوية لو نجيبها صندوق 20 أظن أو حاجة زي كده.
واحنا كده ممكن نبدأ.
طيب بس تديني الإشارة يعني متى كده. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. My brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. From Masjid al-Ummah in Halifax, Canada, we begin today, inshallah, a new major series. I don't know how long it will take, but inshallah we will go in as much depth as possible. And the title of that series is Women and Family in Islam. When we hear that title, the first thing that may come to mind for many of us, why? Why this particular topic? I would like to spend some time being an introductory session or segment of this very important series to make a number of arguments why it's important. Number one, from an Islamic perspective, the family is the cornerstone of any healthy society. Secondly, a righteous woman in her turn also is the cornerstone of a healthy family. Thirdly, that woman, regardless of her role, mother, daughter, grandmother, sister, woman with the variety of roles that she plays and also in various phases in her life represent at least 1/2 of humanity. In fact, some statisticians may argue that globally and in most countries, females, the number of females is more than the number of males, perhaps a range of 2 to 3% or thereabouts. So it is, even numerically speaking, they represent Muslim women in general, 1/2 of humanity. But as Sheikh Qaradawi also argues, that it's not just a matter of numbers. He goes beyond that to say that woman, with her influence on her husband, her children, her society, her environment, in fact, has an influence that could exceed the 1/2 that we were talking about. Fourthly, the attitude towards women historically, I'm not talking about Islam, historically, many, many centuries back, has been seen in negative light. She was blamed of tempting Adam to eat from the forbidden tree, and as such, she's responsible for the descent of Adam and herself, of course, from Jannah, from that only by way of introduction, because inshallah we'll come to that in more depth as we deal with the variety of aspects of the how the Quran and sound hadith view women. And throughout the long centuries, she's been not only blamed in the theological sense, that's before Islam, for tempting Adam, but she's blamed for all problems and evils that's happening in the world on the part of some. Some of the people who exaggerated like that as one poet, and again I am copying here from what Sheikh Qaradawi mentioned. They say, I say it in Arabic first, إن النساء شياطين خلقنا لنا ونعوذ بالله من شر الشياطين. The rough translation, that extremist, you might say, poet says, women are like Satans created for us. We seek refuge, Allah, from the evil of those Satans. It doesn't require any comment to reflect the attitude towards women, or the ultimate of misogyny, as they use the term these days. But again, in fairness, there have been some instances also where philosophers or writers or even poets spoke in praise of women. In fact, it looks like another poet who tried to respond to that first one in a similar kind of intonation, and he says, إن النساء رياحين خلقنا لنا وكلنا يشتهي شم الرياحين. That is, he says, women are like basils, you know, this nice smelling flowers. Women are like basils created for us, and all of us would love to smell the basils. I have some reservation on this. While some mention that verse of poem presented as people who have more positive attitude towards women, I would say that it has a touch also still, not of the full recognition of woman as a human being with capabilities much more than the beauty and attraction. And the word also, we all love to smell the basils. It might be a reflection that when women are praised, it is only because they are a source of enjoyment, for example, for the males. At least, I mean, I could be wrong in my interpretation, but I still have reservation on that. It says nothing really about woman as a human being, as an intellectual being, her knowledge, her intelligence, and other ways she can help her community. I'd like to actually refer here to a very famous, oft-repeated verse of a poem, very common in Egypt, but it might be also in many parts of the Arab world. When Qaradawi mentioned that, he didn't mention the poet, but I think most likely it is the famous Egyptian poet Ahmed Shawqi. I like best what he said, because what he says, and I mentioned that also in Arabic first, الأم مدرسة إذا أعددتها أعددت شعبا طيب الأعراق. Here he says, for example, about the mother. The mother is a school, not a body or rayahin, basic, madrasa. I love that. Mother is a school. If you prepare her correctly, give her the opportunity, you will be preparing actually a nation, a whole nation with, it's difficult to translate طيب الأعراق, but mean people with, or a community with noble descent. Okay. Like I said again, this verse is very profound, but that was not the common feeling towards women. Education of women or girls, unfortunately in the period of decline of the Muslim civilization, was not recognized. There were places, and I'm speaking about some experiences in some Arab countries, And since I'm not that old, I'm not over 100 years or anything, so that even until relatively a few decades ago, there were people who do not allow girls to learn. And if they recognize learning, it's restricted to learning about their deen so that they know how to do their ibadat or read the Quran or something of that nature. What was more amazing even, and for younger people in our times, they might even wonder about it. But it wasn't really that practice limited to many centuries ago, that women and girls were forbidden. I'm not saying discouraged. I'm not saying that there was no accommodation for them in the mosques, forbidden from going to the masjid. I think some of you might be surprised to hear that this happened also, and I have seen it myself on television in UK a few years ago. We're not talking about the 17th century. A few years ago, where the masjid did not have any accommodation for women. Even though I'm not necessarily, I don't agree with the attitude of some of the ladies who wanted to challenge that, but their action was correct. They tried to enter into the masjid, and they were received at the door by the person who's responsible, and he simply told them that there is no accommodation for them. So we're not talking past centuries. The attitude still persists, and inshallah, as we go on in that series, we'll try to analyze some of these attitudes. What did they base their attitude upon? Are there gross misinterpretations of some ayat in the Quran or some ahadith out of the total context of what Islam truly teaches about women and their role in society and in the well-being of the ummah at large, not only for themselves or their families? The fifth argument, that as clear in the previous remark about what happened even in some masajid, we're not talking about others, the attitude of others toward women, that even in the history of Muslims and their present situation, the issue of mistreatment or not recognizing the equality, and we'll talk later about the difference between equality and equity, but equality in the spiritual level of the right, not minna, not something by way of concession, their due right to go to the masjid, as it was the case at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we're saying that even in this issue, Muslims are not free of criticism. The sixth argument is that, which is to me more dangerous, is that many of the cultural practices, which vary, of course, from one Muslim country to the other, but generally speaking, many, I'm trying to be reserved in using terms without exaggeration or trivialization. Many of those cultural practices, in fact, are taken to be part of the teaching of Islam, whether because some people are not totally educated about the truth of Islam, or because they are educated but given the wrong type of information or interpretation. In fact, some people even might justify depriving women, Muslim women, from the due right, whether material or ma'nawi, or even in terms of status or recognition of their role in society, behind just being a mother, which is very important, but there is something also beyond that. In some cases, These cultural practices are not only incompatible with the teaching of Islam, in some cases is outright contradiction from what the Quran and Sunnah teach. On this point, I'd like just to make a point of clarification. To say that some practices or cultural practices are negative, are un-Islamic, I call them un-Islamic Muslim cultural practice, because Islam and Muslim is not identical. But in a way, we can divide the cultural practices vis-a-vis Islamic teaching into 3 points on a continuum. On one hand, at one end, there is fusion between true, authentic Islamic teaching about women or any other topic for that matter, because not only compatible with Islam, may be motivated and nourished by Islam. Example, a lot of people notice that, generally speaking, I hope this is not going to the from good to bad in some Muslim culture these days, where the Islamic identity is under severe attack by not only outsiders but insiders even within the Muslim Ummah. Take, for example, the question of hospitality to guests. Well, it is a cultural practice that can be seen in a variety of countries. You go to Pakistan, Indonesia, you go to Nigeria, you go to the Arab world, mashallah, you find this notion of generosity. And sometimes many of the non-Muslim or people from other faith community, to be more accurate, who visit those countries, they notice that people go out of their way to be helpful and generous. Now, I have no dispute with that. In fact, it is motivated by Islam, as the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhiri falyukrim ضيفه." Anyone who believes in Allah and in the hereafter, let him be hospitable to his guest. Respect of the elderly. You can have a whole list of references in the Quran and Sunnah also about the respect of the elderly. One of them that comes to mind very quickly in Hadith also, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ لَمْ يُوَقِّرْ كَبِيرَنَا وَيَرْحَمْ صَغِيرَنَا. It is not one of us, meaning Muslims, who does not show respect to our elderly and show mercy and compassion on our youngsters. So this is a cultural practice, but I dare suggest humbly that this is a case of fusion between authentic Islamic teaching, in that case generosity and mercy and respect and all of this, and the cultural practice of Islam and the cultural practice might fuse together, one and the same. But if you move on a continuum, we call that, let's say, +1, there is the 0, something in between, neutral. And that means cultural practices that are not based on Islam, that are not required by Islam, but not forbidden or frowned upon by Islam. An example of that would be the variety of foods. The variety of foods in different Muslim countries. The biryani in some countries, the this and that, the couscous in some countries. This is so long as the food is halal. The various tastes of people, whether mild or hot or super hot, it varies even with the same country. I was told that in India, for example, there is a difference between southern India, where food might be very spicy, very hot, and other places. I don't know. They're just as an example. Islam doesn't say you must eat hot food. You must break your fast on biryani. This is permissible. The variations of designs in dress, so long as it meets the basic Sharia requirement. People wear different things that are all perfect and acceptable Sharia-wise, but it doesn't have to be imitation of one particular culture or the other. But once you move on the continuum to the far end, the negative one. And these are the ones that I personally try to pay attention to. Are the cultural practices that are believed by people somehow that it is part of Islam, even though it is against the teaching of Islam. I can't help but give you one example. Sometimes I will be speaking to audience that includes people of other faith community, and somebody raises his hand. What do you think of honor killing in Islam? I said, excuse me? There is nothing called honor killing in Islam. There is shameful murder, not honor killing. And then I start to explain to him about the legal part of it and so on. But culturally speaking, some people thought that this is the honor of the family, this is the defense of morality in society. And if the girl even didn't commit any major sin, just even, they say, slipped in some minor way, the father or the brother or some male in the family give themselves the right to go and take away her life. There are a variety of ways that you can speak about this, not only being unacceptable, a criminal act committed, and people think that this is accepted somehow or condoned by Islam. These are the ones that, inshallah, we will be giving attention to in this series, and we have to say the truth as we understand it. If we are right, may Allah accept it. If we're wrong, may Allah forgive us, but give evidence to show it is wrong, and inshallah it will be accepted, unless there is some misinterpretation of authentic text in the Quran or Hadith. The 8th point, that the Quran teaches us also the procedures when people differ. There are sometimes difference in interpreting some ahadith, okay? But ultimately, the argument should not be, this is the way we've always been taught. No, you could be taught wrong. The Quran refers in more than one instance, or in criticizing those people who reject as the prophets, what they say, قالوا وجدنا عليها آباءنا. We found our parents doing this. That's why sometimes we get the response in the Quran. قل لو كان آباؤكم لا يعلمون شيئا ولا يهتدون. Suppose your parents did not understand. Do you still follow them? It's just like somebody says, I am with the people wherever they're going. Okay, suppose those people are going to hell and they're going down in a slope that would kill them. Are you going to join them, or use your own Allah-given mind and good senses to evaluate, whether this act is acceptable or not? So this is not an excuse. But to be frank also, it is nice to appreciate the great scholarship of our Islamic heritage in jurisprudence and variety of areas. MashaAllah, we have great respect of these imams and these scholars, past and present. But on the other hand, none of them claimed infallibility. In fact, they said it very clearly. There is nobody who is ma'soom. Ma'soom means infallible, except Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the asma here, or infallibility, is not just an empty claim. It is not putting him above humans, that he's something more than a human being, but because he was the one who received revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in word or verbatim like the Quran, in meaning like in hadith, but he used his own words. In the meantime, if he made ijtihad in some issues that there was no revelation on, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preferred something different, He revealed it to him. So Allah was with him all the time. So even if he had something, it's okay with good intention, but Allah wanted something else, He revealed that to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this asma is multifaceted, and only the Prophet of Allah in matters that pertain to religions is ma'soom. Of course, you cannot say the Prophet is ma'soom by preferring certain types of food over others, so long as it's all halal. But we're talking issues that he gave opinion on, made ijtihad, because there was no ayah directly leaving. But Allah was watching over what he's doing and saying. And that's why the two greatest sources of Islam is the Quran and the sound Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Where do we find evidence for that in the Quran? And what to do in case you hear this sheikh said that sheikh said that imam said this, and that imam said that. What do? I read from the Quran directly. In Surah An-Nisa, the surah number is 4, in ayah 59. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا أطيعوا الله وأطيعوا الرسول وأولي الأمر منكم فإن تنازعتم في شيء فردوه إلى الله والرسول إن كنتم تؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر ذلك خير وأحسن تأويلا. Inshallah, the translation that I'll try to use as close as possible in these presentations, and inshallah I have to even review my writings to improve on the translation, is a recent one, which in my humble view and the view of many others also who checked it, is the best ever translation of the message of the Quran into English. Now, I gain nothing by bringing that to your attention. I buy it myself. And we have purchased recently something here for the Masjid al-Ummah to give to people who enter into the fold of Islam, as some translations have grave mistakes that drive people away rather than bring them close. This is called Al-Quran Al-Mubin. Al-Quran Al-Mubin. In English, the clear translations, the clear Quran, that was translated by a graduate with PhD from Al-Azhar. He graduated from the College or Department of Islamic Studies in English. He's an excellent translator and a faqih also, because you have to understand the context of the ayat, you have to have the knowledge. So alhamdulillah, I'm not saying it's perfect. Perfection is beyond human, but it is the best ever that I've found. So it's available actually, and inshallah, if you need more information how to get it, we can help you with that. But notice here the smoothness of translation and its clarity of the ayah I just recited. O believers, obey Allah and obey the messenger and those in authority among you. Should you disagree on anything, then refer it to Allah and His messenger if you truly believe in Allah and the last day. This is the best and fairest resolution. I'm sure some of you who have been using translations can see the vast difference, the smoothness, clarity, and using simple terms, that convey the meaning accurately, but also in a very clear way. And of course, when it says authority amongst you, the interpreters interpreted in two non-contradictory possible interpretation. Some interpret that in authority amongst you, meaning the scholars, because if a scholar, is giving you a fatwa on something that he's competent to give in, then it is acceptable, because if your knowledge is limited, you can't find out yourself, then you can accept the authority so long as you trust the person's knowledge and taqwa. But again, without raising them beyond any level to be regarded as infallible. The others interpret that in authority among you, meaning people also who are like rulers, but with conditions. If those rulers also abide by what Allah and His Messenger taught, not tyrants who think that the whole country is their ownership, all of the people in their nation are their slave servants. No, they have obligation. All the mutuality of obligation and the dictatorship that is rampant in the so-called Muslim world today, especially the Arab world, has nothing to do with the Islamic model. So but once they follow Allah and His Messenger, then you should obey, because there is order. There have to be order in society. What could be a more beautiful, profound, and humble remark made by Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and I think Umar radiallahu anh said something similar. أطيعوني ما أطعت الله ورسوله فإن عصيتهم فلا طاعة لي عندكم. أو كما قال يعني أبو بكر, obey me so long as I obey Allah and His Messenger. If I disobey Allah and Messenger, you owe me no obedience for that. So this is just a note here about an authority, not dictatorial authority, no obedience to any human being according to the Quran and Hadith, in disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His command. And when the Quran here in this ayah, it says, when you dispute, if you dispute anything, refer it back to Allah and His Messenger. Well, to refer it back to Allah, the word of Allah, the Quran, and His Messenger, meaning the sound Sunnah, which gives the authority for Sunnah, and that those who say Quran is enough and deny Sunnah, of course, this is totally contrary to what the Quran really teaches. Let me try to reinforce this point again for its importance, and because many people would say that the word of my sheikh, the word of my imam, I don't listen to anyone else. Look at this. And this also is in Surah An-Nisa, the 4th Surah, in Ayah 65. فلا وربك لا يؤمنون حتى يحكموك فيما شجر بينهم ثم لا يجدوا في أنفسهم حرجا مما قضيت ويسلموا تسليما. But know by your Lord, the address here is to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But know by your Lord, they will never be, meaning true believers, until they accept you, O Prophet, as the judge in their disputes. And not only accept, it says, and find no resistance within themselves. Within themselves, that means in their hearts even. So acceptance not in concrete action, you do or you don't. It is in your heart. You don't resist even with your heart. And that's why I say that you don't reach that level of iman until, you defer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though you might have some issues that's troubling you, but acceptance is there. No resistance within themselves against your decision, and submit wholeheartedly, not reluctantly, wholeheartedly. And the final point I was to make, aside from this argument about the importance of the topic and the importance of going into some depth and not accepting things that are circulating or culturally practiced, or even said by some scholar from the point of view of one view or the other, is to emphasize again the sources that I have been using for this. I begin with others because other sources that I'm referring to are above anything that I might have been involved in. The first, of course, is the Quran, no question, and that's my definitely preferred translation, Mustafa Khattab's. And by the way, he's a Canadian. He's now living in, I think, Waterloo, I believe, here in Canada. Anyway, secondly, what I consider, I have seen and read quite a few books and articles about women in Islam, because I've been involved since 1971 in this pursuit. But the best is almost an encyclopedic work. It's a 6-volume, not all of them are as big as this one. It's 6-volume book, multi-books, actually, encyclopedia, you can call it. It's called تحرير المرأة المسلمة في عصر الرسالة, which means almost like liberation of Muslim women in the time of Risala, in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I find that title rather interesting because when people normally speak about liberating Muslim women, oftentimes they speak about westernized type of liberation and just following the pattern. But the author, by the way, who's a great scholar in that issue in particular, and like the preface to his encyclopedic work by such famous people like Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi and Muhammad al-Ghazali, praise very much his relentless effort over so many years that has been collecting and gathering this type of information. The advantage of that book also is that initially he had a more ambitious plan to make a comprehensive study of the Sunnah and all of that about Muslim women, and also to trace all sound ahadith. But then it became, even though, like I said, 6 volumes, he could not, he said, maybe he felt that he would not live until he, alayhi rahmatullah. But he said, urgently we need to get something to people. So he limited himself largely, but not exclusively, to the ahadith, to sound ahadith in the 2 most authentic collections, Bukhari and Muslim. In some cases, the hadith is accepted both by Bukhari and Muslim, sometimes with slight difference in wording that does not really affect the meaning. The other thing that I chose that as really the best available to my knowledge work on women issue, in depth and analytical, is something that I don't find in some writing until recently. Some authors began to pay attention to that. Of course, from my perspective as a university professor, and I write and also that, you don't say Bukhari even said that. Of course, you might be excused if you don't remember the details, and you give the, you memorize the hadith. But if you look through the 6 volumes, he gives you all the details, that this is in Bukhari, in such and such bab, in many cases such and such hadith. And when he quoted from other than the 2, Bukhari and Muslim, which was not the predominant approach, he chooses also the sound hadith according to the grading of the scholars of hadith. Because you see, the common statements, it has some simplification, but let's at that point make it, because the scholars of hadith might have more deeper assessment of that. But in any case, you can safely say that things that are in Bukhari and Muslim are sahih, are sound. With small exceptions, by the way, that scholars of hadith themselves refer to. But that's the exception, not the rule. So كل ما في البخاري ومسلم, so everything in the 2 sahihain, Bukhari and Muslim, are authentic, but not all authentic hadith are in Bukhari and Muslim. There are other authentic ahadith that is not necessarily, was not available and have not been heard of or collected by Bukhari and Muslim, but they meet. That's why sometimes they say Sahihun ala shart al-Bukhari, that this hadith is authentic according to the criteria, the rigorous criteria used by Bukhari or Muslim, or Bukhari and Muslim altogether. I'm sorry if I went a little bit on a tangent here, but that's very important also, because when we come to quotations of hadith to justify any argument, at least some basic awareness of that might be useful. So that is my main reference. I wasn't very lucky, actually, to get that 6-volume work until many, many years after its publication. The first volume here was published in 1990. Okay. May Allah have His blessing upon this. I knew the author Sheikh Abdul Halim Abu Shukka. And one time I was in a visit to my family in Egypt, and he was kind enough to send someone with the 6-volume work as a gift to me. That was an honor that I didn't really deserve, but I appreciate it. But that was several years after it was published. If I've known it at that time, I could have written something more detailed. However, the initial involvement, which is found on the internet and seem to be getting many hits, especially for those of you in academic circles. There is something called the Research Gate. It's like the people who are like professors or retired professors and so on. So that sometimes they put their work there, and they tell you statistics about how many people read that or quoted. So it was actually, as a graduate student, it was around 1969 before I finished my PhD, but the first publication of that was in 1971 in a Islamic journal called Al-Ittihad, that was part of what was then called the Muslim Student Association of US and Canada, and had so many prints. So that was my first initial involvement. In 1995, however, I'm not selling anything. I don't take a penny on. You can read it actually free if you can't get that work, because that work is in Arabic and it's really in-depth. A summary form, but it was expansion on the small booklet, Wisdom in Islam is called the Gender Equity in Islam. Like I say, you can read it for free. In some sites, you might even be able to download it even for. You want to quote from it, quote. You want to print it for the sake of Allah or for sale at calls, do it. The only royalty that I always demand from my brothers and sisters is one thing: dua. That's alhamdulillah. So, but I mentioned that only so that nobody may think that what I quoted here did not give credit to such a great author, even though it was published, but I wasn't really aware of it. But I found myself in agreement with him. You see, in politeness and humility towards these great scholars, you don't say, I wrote that before him, but he agreed with me, astaghfirullah, from saying that. I'd say, I found myself in agreement with him, even didn't see his work in deference to his depth of knowledge on this. So that is basically the introductory part, and we're reaching now close to 7 o'clock. I have something also prepared to go on getting into the subject matter, but perhaps that might be suitable for a subsequent session, inshallah. But I'll give you some idea that the approach that I followed, not only in gender equity, but in the status of women in Islam from 71, just to organize things. I might change that if I find something better, but most likely, besides introduction or introductory remarks and so on, I feel it's useful to begin first with the spiritual and moral aspect, spiritual in particular. Moving then to economic aspects. What are the rights of women, entitlement, how about the law of inheritance, why there are variations and all of that? Is there the general rule of 2 for 1? Issues like that. And thirdly, going to the social aspect, subdividing it in the status of a female in Islam as a daughter, wife, mother, and sister in faith in general. And here is where, inshallah, I can benefit from this knowledge and what I read also in other jurisprudence book. The question of family, inshallah, will be greatly expanded to deal also with something that was not included in that short book. The question of engagement, criteria for choice of spouses, the marital relationship, the rules during engagement, not engagement in the military, rules of engagement, engagement prior to marriage, I mean. Okay, and all these matters that, and finally the social and political role of women in Islam. And of course, if there is something, I've read the 6th volume, but inshallah we might focus on some additional issues or deal with them in some depth. I am personally very excited about this series for the simple reason really that there are lots of issues that bothered me in my search for truth and authentic information about women in Islam, which is one of the most misunderstood aspects of Islam, aside from the issue of two things, violence and women, the two big issues where lots of misquotation, misunderstanding, misinterpretation, and sometimes sheer fabrication has been confusing so many people. And if Allah gives me the life until we go through it, I'm praying that it reaches as many people as possible, so that if Allah knows sidq and sincerity in that, then I may receive something I'm starved for, forgiveness and reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not only for me selfishly, but for anyone who takes a role or contribute in any way in getting others to clarify it, with the view also of multiplying rewards of everyone by explaining that to our Muslim brothers and sisters first, and then also to answer in a viable, correct, authentic, sincere. We don't just answer to please people, sincere way, and inshallah all of us will be in that reward. Sawa. Jazakum Allahu khairan, baraka fiikum. There's only a couple of minutes if there's any urgent questions, not on the issues, inshallah. We haven't started, but this is setting the stage, inshallah, for what is forthcoming. Any question about the methodology or references that you might wish to?
Who is the author of the Clear Quran?
The Clear Quran. Yeah, as a translator, his name is Mustafa. He spells it Mustafa, like Frank, A. And the last name is Khattab, Khattab, Mustafa Khattab. And by the way, I'm glad that you asked that question, brother. This might be expensive if you order it individually. I have a site that provide information how to order it in bulk. We did that already, alhamdulillah, for free distribution for new reverts to Islam and so on. And we got an excellent price for, and it will be available also for non-reverts, recent reverts, at the exact cost. It came, but the biggest problem with shipping, that the shipping is much more than the cost, and they quoted it. But we calculated the ones that we got for da'wah, it came up to 7 Canadian equivalent. But like I said, more than half of that actually is shipping through the, so we might seek someone who might be coming from the States and try to make arrangements, because it's ridiculous, shipping. But in the meantime, we might be able to join together, just maybe through the imam or someone, to order copies in bulk. The ones that are least costly are the ones that are only English only. But the ones that have English, Arabic on both sides, it's much more costly. But inshallah, you have the all information. You can just go to the site. I think it's called Furqan, Al-Furqan or something. Okay. Well, yeah. Any other question on these introductions? Okay. We need to be on time, not only in beginning, which was close enough, but it's time, inshallah, in case somebody wants to, unless there is one quick question. Any question from the sisters in the back? No? Arban? No? Okay. Any question here? Okay, 3, 2, 1, done. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. وإياكم.